Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the EFL Fantasy Podcast. My name is Angus,
My name is Dan.
and we're here to review the game week 4 action. Happy international break, everyone. The first one of the season already. I'm sure everyone is delighted to have it upon us. But yeah, we're going to talk about some of the action from game week 4. We're going to go through how our teams did. Um, We're sort of going to go through some of the key team news. We're going to answer your questions. Don't think we'll do too much on the transfers this week. We might do something separate about the transfers. We'll sort of confirm that at another point. But obviously, they're still going on. I've had a notification through 5 minutes ago that Stoke have loaned out Ryan Mai. So they're still
Okay.
happening. Uh, but first things first, Dan, how are you?
Not bad. As Luton aren't doing very well, I'm quite enjoying the international break so far. In all honesty, I think Luton needs it. I think there's quite a few teams, especially the three relegated sides from the Premier League. Probably they can sort of settle into a bit of a rhythm now. They know their teams. Like Burnley, we'll get into Burnley later on, but the number of players they lost and brought in, Sheffield United. Although they've sort of had a fixed squads since the start of the season, they did get rid of a lot of long-standing players. So yeah, just like any international break, some teams probably don't want it, some teams do, and Luton are one of the teams that definitely want it at the minute.
Yeah, and I think you can draw that across the league, like you say. Some clearly will want it, some really won't. Um, we'll probably end up talking about some of the teams that don't, or would
Yeah,
would have rather not had it. So yeah, so as I said, we're going to sort of run through our teams. We'll do the team news. Our framing this week is going to be going to talk mainly about the sort of the current top six, and then we'll get into maybe a couple of the other teams. Um, so that's sort of what we'll end up doing. In terms of how we did this week, I'll go first. I got 66 -4, which was a red arrow. But I'm still generally pretty happy with where I'm at. Like I'm not paying too much attention to rank, as we've said before, but seems to generally be going in a decent direction. Uh, I had Hazard in goal for 6, Pring 1, Firpo 13, Doughty 2, Pires 6, Twine in for 2, Azaz 11, Hamer 2, Joseph captain for 18, Adebayo vice captain for 3, and Haji Wright for 2. Um, like I say, red arrow, but in general, I'm quite happy with where I'm at and what I've got. Um, but yeah, so that's me. Dan, how did you do this week?
pretty similar. I got 62 -4. The transfers I did was Pickering and Latte Laff for Sirkin and Adebayo. Um, we had that whole Latte Laff. Not so much if he was leaving it. It looked like he wasn't quite early on, but there was the rumours he didn't travel with the squad, and with the strategy I'm on playing away days, probably in seven, he's not away, so it just made sense to get rid of him then. Um, I got Jensen 6, Bogle 6, Aylin 8, Doughty 2, Sirkin 4, Azaz 11, Dembele 2, O'Hare 2. I captained Joseph for 18, vice captained Adebayo for 3. And I had Kiefer Moore for 0 after his missed penalty, which didn't go great. Um, I had Koleosho on my bench. If he's still with Burnley, so that's probably not a terrible one to have because if there wasn't the rooms for Latte Laugh, I might have got rid of him. So that's one less player I have to sort out before my away days. But yeah, I'm just inside the top 400, but I'm yet to play a boost either. So yeah, I'm not. I think I'm doing okay. I'd like to do better, but I think I'm doing all right.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, it's balancing out at the moment, like the concerns about the rank with the fact, it's game week 4, lots of people have played boosts, etc., etc. But yeah, I think relatively decent weeks there, although a couple of probably frustrations. I mean, I bought Adebayo this week and vice captained him, and I think one or two moments in the looting game go differently, and I'm,
Yeah.
really happy with that. Um, but yeah, so moving on from that, I think the next thing is coming to you for the sort of key team news. So I'll hand back over to you.
Yeah, so we'll start with Luton. Walters started at right wing back. Obviously, Abene left for Ipswich during the last few days of the window. So I would say Walters is first option at right wing back. QPR, Madsen played the 10, Lloyd, Dembele, and Frey were the front three. For Burnley, Kolyoshu and Anthony were on the wings behind Foster. For Blackburn, Beck started at left back ahead of Pickering. I think he might have been injured. Byman and Guehi were in as Ohashi and Rankin Costello dropped to the bench. For Borough, new signing Borges started at left back. Conway was in up front, obviously with no Latte left. Leeds, Solomon went straight in with James missing. Hull, Beda in for Burstow. Millwall, new signing Coburn went straight in up front instead of Bradshaw. Sheffield Wednesday, Ugbo was in for Windass. Um, Oxford, McEachran was in for Volks. I know that's not majorly fantasy relevant, but some people have Volks as a 4.5, and Volks was on the bench. Um, Preston Greenwood started. Frokier Jensen was on the bench. For Swansea, with Popnik started. For Portsmouth, Sammy Silvera came back in after he was cup tied against his parent club. Sunderland, Ballard was in for Elise. Neil was suspended. And for Sheffield United, Raksaki was in for Brooks. That's it this week. Obviously, when they next start with all the new signings, it could be a quite eventful team news.
Yeah, I mean that's gonna be very interesting to see. Um, so yeah, so I think we're going to talk about the top six, as we said, and I think there's some interesting ones here. There's some teams we would have expected to be there. Some interesting ones that I'm not sure will stay there. Um, and so I guess that just sort of gives us the opportunity to talk about them. We're going to use the framing of the most recent game, but it's going to be a little bit more of a chat about how they're doing early stages. Um, so we'll start at the top with Sunderland, who have had a flying start to the season. They're the only team with a 100% record. This weekend they won 3-1 against Portsmouth. Uh, my favourite goal of the weekend. In fairness, I haven't quite watched all of the highlights. It's been quite busy for me. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the Zach Swanson own goal will be my favourite goal of the weekend. Gets absolutely smashed into him by a teammate. Um, and that made it 1-0. Alan Brown then made it 2-0. Um, not long after, Mundell made it 3-0. And then they did concede late on with a Luke 9 own goal that I'd probably be talking about more if the Portsmouth own goal hadn't happened in the same game. Um, but yeah, so big start for them. 4 wins out of 4. Um, no Jack Clarke, no problem. Um, and it's all feeling quite good for Sunderland at the moment. I don't know what your thoughts are on them. We've talked about them in bits and pieces, but sort of just what your read is on them so far.
Yeah, I think they've been pretty impressive. I think a lot of the games they've deservingly won. if you look over the data. Um, I'm not too surprised with their win at Portsmouth. I think we've mentioned a few times that although the Portsmouth had picked up three draws um, against Luton, Leeds, and getting the other one, is it Borough? Borough, like on another occasion, they comfortably lose all three. So it felt like one of the top teams were going to come and beat them quite comfortably, and that's what Sunderland did. I think the most interesting thing from a Gaffr point of view, and we've mentioned it a few times, is there's loads of options. There does seem to be a pretty steady lineup now. Um, Obviously, Ballard came back in. They did sign, was it Mepham, which I think was a really good signing considering um, they have such a way of recruiting that they have moved away for the odd player like Mepham and Brown. Um, you've got that front four with Roberts, Bellingham, Mayenda, and Mundle, all reasonably priced. And but if Mundle stays in first choice 5.5, he's definitely the main option I'm looking at. I don't know. Would you say Mundle is the best option, or you could easily go to all three? I think probably Bellingham would be fourth out of those four. I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I think, particularly in terms of the attack, you're probably looking at sort of Mundell and um, probably Mayenda, um, in part for the value and in part, I think, just for the production. Um, really like Patrick Roberts, but there is a little bit about the extra money you're spending on him compared to the others, but I do like him as well. But we talked after their last game about just how many options it felt like there were from Sunderland, and that still feels the case at this point.
I brought in Sirkin. Um, they kept three clean sheets before this game, and obviously Luke O'Nine's headed into his own goal in the last basically minute to spoil my clean sheet. So yeah, happy with Sirkin moving forward. Um, we've mentioned the goalie. I think there's probably you're not going to waste a spot on a Sunderland goalie. I don't think. Um, do you own any at the minute, Angus?
No, I've managed to not own any of them. They're top of the priority list though. We'll get into a couple of sort of boost considerations later on, but that's part of the reason. Also, just they've been playing well, but um, there's a little bit around. Now's a decent time to get them in. Um, and I think probably for me, just in terms of my relative issues, Sirkin is probably top of my list. That's not because I dislike the attackers. It's just quite apart from anything else. I'm pretty sure I've got a Lucas Engel problem, which Dennis
Yeah.
Sirkin solves very nicely. So that's part of the reason he's sort of the main one for me.
Yeah, obviously in game week 5 they come back to away to Plymouth. They then got probably they've got Sunderland, Middlesbrough at home, Watford away, Derby at home, and Leeds at home. So it looks a bit tricky if you're going off the league. You've got a couple of probably okay fixtures when you think they do quite well. Um, but yeah, I think just because some of the prices you could even if you don't want to play him in all the games, you could easily bench him. I'm not sure it'd be wise though. So yeah, a lot to like from Sunderland, I think.
Yeah, very impressed with them. And as I said, the one team sort of with 100% record early doors, and so I think they'll probably be a little bit disappointed in terms of what we've said about the international break being here. Um, Second place at the moment is West Brom, who've had a very good start to the season. They won 1-0 against Swansea, that they have 10 points from their opening four games. I also love they have 10 points from the opening four games and a goal difference of +4.
Yeah,
Which I think perfectly sums up West Brom, really. Uh, but they won this game with a Jason Malumbi goal. I think both sides, certainly judging by the highlights, could have had more goals in this game. I think West Brom had more of the chances, but there were a couple from Swansea that certainly could have made this look different. But yeah, very solid start for West Brom as well. I think they, aside from Josh Maja, they've gone largely overlooked by a lot of people to start the season. I know, well, actually, no, I know a few people went on Tom Fellows, and I did think that was a good pick. Um, I think the only team to concede fewer goals than them is Sunderland. Sunderland conceded one, West Brom conceded two. Um, but yeah, thoughts on West Brom, Dan?
I pretty agree. If you, like I said, you look at the results. I know they got 10 points, but a draw against Leeds is. I think most fans will take that. Um, Leeds will probably be up there. Interesting. The data for the Stoke game was a pretty even game, and they seem to have won it because they've taken their chances. So, as you mentioned, Maja 4 goals. I'm not sure anyone had him being top goal scorer after a few games. I brought in Adebayo this week. It was between him or Maja, and of course, I went with Adebayo. Um, do you think Maja's a good option long term?
Struggle with Josh Magic because he's one that I'm still not convinced by. But even the highlights and the bits and pieces I've seen and whatever, and it's like, well, he's clearly playing well. Like there's no disputing that. And so I think anytime you've got a player that's playing well in a good team, you have to sort of consider them an option. He lays off the goal well for Malumbi in this game as well, and I do think that you have to make an argument for him at this point.
I agree. Obviously, they managed to get Mikey Johnson back. Um, do you think he just slots in at where Carlon Grant is?
I assume so. Well, I think we saw a little bit last season um, that there was a bit of rotation, particularly within games, and I do think they're set up for that again. Like we saw, they can still have options in spite of that. Johnston was an option at times. Diangana was, Fellows was, but I think there will be that element of sometimes you're going to get to a game and your West Brom attacker is going to be on the bench.
Yeah, that haunts me. And Corberán wasn't even manager when I had double West Brom attack. Um, yeah, they've been. I know we thought Jed Wallace dropped off last year mainly because he was playing up front a lot of it, but he's still about as well. I do think Fellows is a good option. We've spoken a number of times of how much we rate him. There was obviously interest in him towards the end of the window. Um, Defensively, Angus, they they've been good defensively for a while, so you're paying premium prices. Are you going to get attacking returns from Furlong? Hegum's still playing left back, but they have brought in Styles and someone else who's escaped my mind at the moment.
Frabotta, the left back on loan from Juventus.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Have you thought about them at all? There's so many good attacking it. They've not really thought of them, but they'll be a good differential, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly in terms of the defensive ones, I think you're mostly banking on the defensive stuff, which is fine, like because if they're going to be, one of the better teams defensively, that's still enough. I'm not really expecting a massive amount of um like attacking returns from Furlong or Hegem, but I think You know, they're one of the few teams where I think just the defensive stuff and maybe, bits and pieces of bonus and maybe the odd return, um, probably worth it.
Yeah, I do wonder if they're because I know Hegem can play at centre back, and on the heat map, Furlong is at forward. I wonder if it's they're doing like what a lot of the modern teams do. One of the fullbacks drops into a three, and maybe Furlong pushes forward. Although Velos likes to play wide as well. So have you watched West Brom yet this season, Angus? Like obviously highlights we've seen. Have you watched a game live?
I don't think so.
Yeah, this. I think I need to watch them really. Um, yeah, like I said, I think there's decent options. Maybe wait and see what Mikey Johnson has impact maybe with fellows. Madger, I think if you're gonna, I think you mentioned if you're gonna do Madger, was it last week? So you might have missed it, sort of the boat.
Yeah,
Um, and defence, there'll be good differential. I'm not sure you'll get a massive haul from them.
yeah. I mean, I think if you view someone like Madger as he's going to go in for like, you know, 8,
3 or 4 games.
8 weeks or something, then I think it's at this point now you've missed particularly one of the better fixtures. He has to be like sort of a long-term pick. I think they have a nice sort of next 8, give or take. Like there's a couple that aren't great in there, but in general, sort of like if you're like I'm
Yeah,
going to put him in for an 8 game stretch, I think that's probably the way you'd have to view it at this point, and I think that's perfectly valid. Like they have Portsmouth, like that run is Portsmouth away, Plymouth home, Sheffield Wednesday away, Middlesbrough at home, Millwall at home, Oxford away, Blackburn away, Cardiff at home. Like that's still a good run, and so I think they are also like while we're sort of trying to bounce around other teams and find the right options and everything, actually maybe getting one or two West Brom in your team and just having them in there for that long period of time could actually be quite useful for people as well.
yeah. So maybe that's where you get in a Furlong. Furlong's going to play near enough every game, so just getting him in, he'll probably get 3 or 4 clean sheets in those 6.
Yeah, yeah, you'd certainly think so. um so third in the league, I'm sure Dan is very excited to talk about
Yeah,
this.
starting to feel a bit sick.
Is Watford. They lost this weekend, thanks to a Daniel Backman own goal in the second minute. It was their first loss of the season. They'd won 3 out of 3 before that. Um, and that was in the second minute. Before that, they'd got wins against was it Millwall, Stoke, and Derby. Uh, Not necessarily the toughest run, but you can only beat what's in front of you, and they'd done pretty well in those games. Scoring 8, conceding 3, I think it was. So and then obviously losing this game, which I think you could argue uh, more could have happened each way. Um, and so it's a bit of a weird one to assess after the fact. The fact that it was 1-0. Um, you had the own goal where O'Hare is trying to put it across goal and it hits the back of Backman and goes in. Um, you've got the penalty that obviously Kiefer Moore had saved that I just don't think is a penalty. Um, I think Arblaster's already on his way down and drags his leg to make sure there's contact.
I
Like
mean, it's
he's already,
reckless, though, isn't it?
yeah, but he's already halfway to ground by the time there's any contact.
I think
And
that's
there's
a
only
penalty.
contact because he drags his leg behind him. If he just runs normally, there's no contact.
I
Um,
mean, why are you diving in the box like a lunatic anyway? You deserve to get
yeah.
punished for it.
Um, so for me personally, it was then sort of justice that the penalty was saved. I'm
Do
sure
you have Kiefer Moore?
No, I'm sure
There you go.
Keeper Moore owners were wishing that our blaster hadn't sort of won that penalty.
Do you know what? I thought he was going to miss as
Yeah,
well. because I didn't know he was going to take it. I thought Hamer was going to take it.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised he took it. Obviously not
Yeah.
majorly surprised. We've seen him take penalties before and he's the striker and whatever, so but there was a little bit of surprise there. It wouldn't surprise me if he's not on penalties anymore, but we'll see. Because I think they do have a couple of others that are capable. It's also worth noting off the back of that in terms of talking about how this game could have gone differently and everything. I mean, Musa Sissoko definitely pulls back Callum O'Hare's foot. At the end of the first half, he makes the most of it, but it does happen. I have to admit, I was unsure about what the rules were if a challenge happens off the pitch, because they were certain on Sky Sports it was a penalty, and I was just I genuinely don't know about like what the rule is if a sort of foul or whatever happens off the pitch.
I
Um,
don't know.
and so I was like, I
I
was
don't
sort of going
know.
off how sure they were on Sky, but that it should have
You'd
been a
like to think
penalty.
that they were right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think there were reasons for encouragement for Sheffield United in this game, but I think actually for Watford, the fact they actually came out of this only losing 1-0 away at Sheffield United, which I think is still going to be one of the tougher games you'll have this season, and the fact that they are sitting, I mean, I know it's very early stages, but the fact that they are sitting in third in the table, they've won 3 out of 4. They've got to be left sort of feeling positive. Um, I'm going to make you say something, I guess, positive about Watford now, or you can say it's all fake and they're going to drop down the table.
No, I'm not sure. I only managed to watch the first half of this, and I thought Sheffield United were quite comfortably the better side. I think we've mentioned a few times. I think Ryan Andrews is a decent option at 5 million defensively. He's quite attacking, especially when they're playing the wing backs. Um, did you watch the game, Angus?
Yes, yes, I did.
Yeah. So obviously they've got Chet and Kayembe behind. Do you? I know it might be tricky to, to see. Was Kayembe, is he a good option at 5.5? Do you think? Was he getting in positions? I know it's tricky because Sheffield United are probably one of the better teams they'll play.
Yeah, it felt more driven by Chak Fatadze in this game than Kayembe.
Mm.
I think Kayembe will still be a decent option. I think the fact he's got some of those set pieces as well helps. Um, but certainly, based off that game, I would feel better about Chak Fatadze of the two.
Would would you be willing to pay 1 point? Well, it's about 1.5 million. I think KMB's probably gone up a bit,
Mm.
but would you pay the difference?
I'd I'd need more in terms of I haven't got either, and I'm not necessarily looking at buying either right now. If I was going off just sort of watching that game and what I know about the players, I'd probably go check for Tadse. But
Yeah.
like, it's difficult to ignore the returns that Kayembe has got so far. But I think for me, like if it wasn't a budget like crunch in my team, um, I'd probably be willing to pay the extra for Chak for Tadse.
They did get Jefferson over the line in the end on deadline day. Do you think he ends up coming in, Angus, over Bayo?
Think so. Um, I don't think they've necessarily been convinced by Bayo. I think they like him, but I don't necessarily think they're convinced by him. Um, and I think, Jebison, particularly when you see a lot of these sort of loans from Premier League clubs, there's often sort of, promises made about how much they're going to play when they make the move. Now, obviously, things like form, play into that, but I do think the intention will be for Jebison to play significant minutes.
Yeah, obviously the other striker, um, Rajovic, has left at Watford now as well. So it's basically just a straight shootout from what I see from Jefferson and Bayo, so that'll be interesting to see how that ends up. Long term, Angus, are you like interested in signing any Watford? I personally would only go KMB or Andrews
Yeah, I've been
if I
very
had.
I've liked the look of Andrews. And so I think, I don't hate him as an option. I think Chak Tadze, like I say, I'm a big fan of him. And I do think for those looking at 5.0 keepers, particularly if you're not happy with your keeper for whatever reason, I do think Backman is an option. I don't think he's necessarily the best option, but I do think particularly for some of those, like obviously some would be looking at the likes of Cooper, but you don't necessarily want to block yourself off three Sheffield United outfield and things like that. And that's where I think Backman could, like, say similar with Patterson, for example. And so I
Yeah,
do think someone like Backman could actually solve an issue for people.
it's
Um,
fair.
but yeah. Fourth place, we've got Leeds. Um, they beat Hull 2-0. I didn't manage to see much of this game, but a lot of the comments I'd seen about were things like, it should have been more and things like that.
Yeah, I think it was pretty routine. If you could have said who's going to win 2-0,
Yeah,
I think this would have been quite high up, I think.
yeah,
Um, just because Hull's still bedding in players, Leeds, although they have lost a lot of players, that's still some firepower, and they've got a strong spine and defence there as well. So wasn't overly surprised by the result. Um, Good for Joseph to get a goal. Um, a couple of weeks ago, I nearly got rid of him, and since then he's got 3 attacking returns. So yeah, starting to produce. Um, Probably the biggest news is Manor Solomon came in and got the start. Angus, um, I know you're unsure of how good he is, but he has dropped down to championship level. You would expect in an attacking team it will play to his strengths, and he should be one of the better players in the league.
yes. I think and certainly if he's as good as quite a few people believe he is, he should shine at this level. I think
Yeah,
that will be the real test. Like, I am still skeptical. I think if you look at things like his attacking returns, I think his best ever season is 10, and that's he got in like 1 year with Shakhtar. Um, and so, it's one of those things you can't, like, you look at some of the games played, and that is part of it. But I also think you can't just overlook the fact that like he has a habit of missing games. You look across his career, he has a habit of missing games. But if he's going to sort of show real quality, this is going to be a situation for him to do so in this Leeds team, dropping down to the Championship. Like, he should show. Um, and if I'm wrong about him, I'm wrong about him. So be it. But I have my sort of questions about him. I'm not saying he's bad. I just have my questions about how good he actually is. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I think if he's going to play regularly, and if he shows sort of, I mean, he's got an assist in this game. If he keeps sort of playing and producing, then he's going to become a significant option for people in the game.
Do you think Leeds did enough transfer wise? Obviously, they were never going to be able to replace, um, especially Rutter and Somerville to that level. But do you think they've built a squad here that's good enough for the top two?
Yes, I
I
think
think I have to agree as well.
I think you look at sort of particularly the first choice 11. Um, I mean, you've got a little bit of a question going forward about the first choice left back because they've obviously brought in a new left back, but the fact they've got two options there, they've got Bogle at right back, they've got Roden and Strauch as the first choice centre backs. They've got um, Vober is still there at centre back. If they had an issue, they could drop Ampadu back in there as well. The fact
Yeah.
they've got Ampadu in midfield and Gruev and Rothwell who can play in there, and you know Dan James was injured, and it doesn't matter. You're still putting out sort of Nonto, Solomon, and Aronson as the three behind a
Yeah.
striker, and Ramazani was on the bench, and Tanaka can come into the team as well, and Piero came off the bench and scored. Like obviously, I didn't sort of say obviously Joseph got the
Bamford's
first
injured.
goal, Piero got the second. Bamford's injured. You just assume he's back at some point. You're just reeling off names here, and I think it is one of those things where you know, aside from maybe being touch light in central midfield, and even then, I'm not sure they're actually light there. Um, Maybe reliable attack, like goal scoring. Although if Joseph is going to sort of develop into that, and then you have sort of Piero and Bamford as the other striking options, then actually that's fine too. It's sort of like yeah, they should be making top two this season.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. Do you have any Angus currently?
I have Firpo, and
Yep.
Joseph. I sold Dan James after buying him in part because I wasn't sure I was going to want him after the break, both in terms of just the attackers there and sort of seeing exactly how it's going to shape up. But also just I think there were a couple of games where I was like, I'm not necessarily sure I'm going to want there. They come back to Burnley at home. They play Cardiff away, but then they've got Coventry at home, Norwich away. Like a couple of those teams who aren't necessarily playing as well, but you're still not looking at those games like, yeah, I really want sort of, one of my premium players to have those games. So that was part of the reason I sold um, James. I'll sort of see what I do with the others, but um, I'm certainly not sort of concerned about having multiple leads. Do you have three at this point or less than that?
I have two. I've got Bogle and Joseph. With my strategy of away days in seven, I don't think they play away, so they'll be gradually coming out of the team. And with them, I think, like you said, I think they come back to Burnley. One, if not two, might go um, after the international break. I think it's a risk, but
Yeah.
I've got a sort of build towards the away days.
Yeah, we'll come on to the away days later. One of my concerns about game week 7 as one of the options is that Leeds don't play away. So, which, as you say, there is that sort of balance to be struck. Um, but yeah, they're certainly sort of looking good at the moment. And just with that sort of wealth of options, I think that's the other key for them really. They've had a couple of sort of disappointing results, but I think even within those games, I mean, we talked about the Portsmouth game week 1. How often they
Yeah,
win that game and that sort of thing. So I think there's it was only really the game away to West Brom, which to be honest, point away at West Brom, you're not necessarily that concerned about either.
yeah,
So
that's fine.
um,
Especially with the upheaval, that was when Ruta was gone and
yeah,
things like that. So yeah, I think they'll be quite happy. I think they'll just look at it and say we should have beat Portsmouth as well.
yeah.
If we were on 10 points, no one would be saying anything. So
Yeah, absolutely. Fifth and sixth, quite conveniently, played each other this week. In a derby game, I think a quite heated derby game at times. I was quite disappointed I wasn't able to watch this one. This probably would have been my pick if I hadn't been at the Arsenal game. But Lyle Foster um, gave Burnley the lead in this game. Another one who ended up staying at the club. Um,
yeah,
and then was given the freedom of the Blackburn penalty area to head in um, after some great play between Brownhill and Anthony on the left hand side. Um, Blackburn equalised an incredible strike from Andy Vyman. I think we've seen, not necessarily literally this, but we've seen Andy Vyman is capable of the spectacular. Um, and this was a pretty impressive example of that. Um, And then the only sort of other real sort of thing to mention from this game it was Gay getting himself sent off. Um, you weren't as pleased at this. I think it was we broadly agreed in terms of what the issue was. I think your issue was about that it's not always enforced in terms of the
Yeah,
gesturing
that's the
for
thing.
an opponent
Yeah,
to be booked. Which I do agree with you on that front. I think it's similar to, not to get too far into the Premier League because obviously you don't want to. It's similar to a lot of the conversation around the Declan Rice second yellow at the moment, about like, oh, how often is or isn't it a yellow card versus whether it should be. And I think that's the thing with this is it absolutely should be a yellow card. It's quite clear that it is a yellow card. It's just not always given. I think the fact that the thing that I had, which, particularly when players know it's a yellow card, he gives quite a prolonged gesture for a second yellow card. Like he's repeatedly sort of,
yeah,
signaling with his hand for it to be a yellow card. And I think that's almost, I think, what gets him done. Almost how prolonged the gesture is, as much as anything else.
yeah. I don't know. I just think, do we really want to see players? I know he should get it, but
Mm.
like we know in a month's time, someone's going to do that, and the ref just won't send him off. You've ruined it. It was quite a good game up until then. Blackburn had got back into it, obviously with the vibe. I don't know if you know that they should have had a second goal as well. Blackburn, they
So
mucked up
I
over it.
I actually I actually think it was correct to rule it out
They gave it wrong. They
because
guessed for
because
they
because
thought it was offside and
Hedges
it wasn't.
because Hedges, who was offside, then bumps the defender, so he has interfered with play. Now you can say whether the
I'm
defender
not
would have got there
convinced
or not,
that's what
but
they gave it.
that no, but as
I'm
in
not
that's the
sure
thing.
they gave that for that
I
though.
think they've got the correct decision for the wrong reasons.
Yeah,
Um,
well,
which because I did want to mention that because I obviously wasn't watching the game, but watching the highlights back, I was like, ah, yes, that's what's happened there. He's interfered from an offside position, which he absolutely has, but I don't think that's
I'm
what
not
they
sure
gave
they
it
gave
for.
that. No. Um, yeah, so yeah, well, I think Blackburn have been quite impressive. I think we've mentioned their starting 11 is pretty strong. They got some options on the bench. I do want to mention Owen Beck. If you've got Pickering, I think you might be a bit worried about this. Um, he he comfortably stopped Kolioshu. I don't know if you know too much about him. I think he was on loan in Scotland last year.
Yeah, and I know, like he was a real sort of staple in Scottish fantasy, particularly the first half of the
Yeah,
season on loan at Dundee. He then went back briefly in January to Liverpool, and then ended up going to Dundee again. I don't know, particularly the first half of the season, he was a real staple of the fantasy game there. I think he was very well owned, and he was one that immediately got my attention with the loan move to Blackburn.
obviously in this game you didn't see his attacking potential, but the way he handled, like I mentioned, the Kolioshu, who I saw him against Luton, he's a very good player. I do wonder if we get rotation, it'll be a bit annoying with a few people have Pickering. So yeah, that's one to pay attention to. I think. Um, I just think they do sort of rotate the front a bit. Vyman came in for this one. Um, Doden looks like he's pretty settled, I would say. And yeah, anyone for Blackburn? Obviously, that's also something to mention. They did sign another goalie as well. Um, obviously, Pears kept in, but I'm pretty sure he was on the bench. Yeah, he was. So um, you get the feeling Pears is one mistake away from getting dropped. I think.
Yeah, I mean they've got some interesting players. I like Cozier Dewberry, who they brought in, who
Yeah.
been at Arsenal, and done well in the sort of youth teams there. Beck is very much on my radar, as I say. I think he's very interesting. We've seen Britain, Britain do well. I thought he actually didn't do particularly well on the Burnley goal, but we've seen him be an option so far this season. But I think, if Beck is going to play, which I think, again, another one of these loan moves where you would assume that he's been sent somewhere to play regularly. So I think he could well be an option, but I do like the fullbacks there. I think otherwise, we talk about Tyrese Dolan and I think he'll be a consideration. They brought in Todd Cantwell, who shouldn't be a threat, but probably will be. Um,
Yeah, obviously did you get 18 months of him at Rangers, Angus?
Something like that, yeah.
He did all right when he first came, didn't he? He scored a few goals.
It's one of those. It's the Todd Cantwell thing. You have these little runs where you sort of see the player who Norwich valued at all that money, and then you sort of see you then watch the really frustrating Todd Cantwell immediately afterwards.
So do you think he's going to come in surely and
Yeah,
play in this?
yes, I would
So
assume so.
do you think Dolan goes to the right?
I would assume Dolan stays in the team, but like you say, I think that probably means, I mean, whether it's the right or the left, we'll see. But I think it does mean that he goes to a wide position. Um, I mean, it means that they've got strength in each of those positions, which in
Yeah.
some ways is good, in some ways is bad. But until I see exactly how it shakes out, I do have that little bit of concern.
Yes. What about Burnley then, Angus? Obviously, a
Um,
crazy amount of ins and outs.
yeah, I think the first thing we have to talk about, when I saw the teams for these games, we have to talk about the Burnley bench for this game. We can talk about the Burnley team, but I think we have to talk about the Burnley bench for this game. Vladke, Sambo, who they brought in, Egan Riley, Bashir Humphreys, Masengo, Sarmiento, Benson, Huntonji, and Jay Rodriguez. Now, we may have questions even about players like Jay Rodriguez. That is an incredible bench. Um, and it shows the strength of the team. I mean, Trafford in goal, you've got, they kept Estev. I think Perez has started well. They brought in Worrell. Connor Roberts is still there. Hannibal came into the team in midfield alongside Josh Lawrence and Josh Brownhill. Kolyosho is still there. Foster is still there. Anthony came in. Yeah, like, I mean, everyone knows I'm not the biggest fan of Scott Parker, but you know, Scott Parker has an incredible record of getting promoted by having one of the best squads in the league, and they have given Scott Parker one of the best squads in the league. And he's just about managed not to hold them back before. And I think you know you're looking at a similar situation. I think that's incredible strength there, and they're the
See
other
and
one.
Fleming as well.
Yeah, yes, of course, Fleming. They brought him in and everything. It's just like it's almost going to be the big challenge is, you know, not simply working out who you want from Burnley, but who you think is going to play reliably because there are so many options everywhere that it's almost just like finding those players that are going to play sort of regularly is the challenge.
I'm I'm trying to go back to his Fulham and his Bournemouth side. He didn't rotate massively, did he? Like they
No,
had like a Solanke would play and Mitrovic. So I wonder if Foster will be his main man.
yeah, and I think that's the
Um,
one place you would probably say in terms of depth that they're light is sort of number
mm,
nine. That your backup striker is basically Jay Rodriguez. And now that's fine as to have someone like Jay Rodriguez in and around the squad, to give you some minutes, etc. But that is essentially your backup striker. You would think that, like you say, that's a good sign almost for Foster.
you have Perez, am
Yeah,
I correct?
yeah,
He looked dangerous in this.
yeah.
He's high on my list. Probably underpriced, I think. 5.5, 6, wherever he is. Conor Roberts looks like he's pretty nailed the right back down as well.
Yeah.
Um, so do you think it's so hard? Do you think Fleming comes in at the 10 or
I think so. I do have questions about particularly the fact that by all accounts they seem to, be offering out Josh Brownhill, who is the captain. And I'm sort of like, okay, what does that mean? Is he just now that he's staying there, is he still going to play regularly? Um, my best guess is that to start, whether it's a two and a one or a three, would be Hannibal, Brownhill, and Fleming.
what
Um,
about Cullen?
I mean, I
Cullen
assume Cullen
plays
is going to
surely.
play, but there's so many options that are like. But I mean, I think Scott Parker loves having a player like that. Just sort of in to help dictate things in the midfield. So I assume, like, yeah, he's probably gonna play, but there's just so many options here where it's just like, okay, but like if Cullen comes in, then like, does Brownhill miss out, or does Hannibal miss out?
Wonder,
Like,
I don't know. I'm not sure I know the fuss about Hannibal. He
no, but they
he's
brought him in,
good.
like, they,
Oh yeah, but
yeah,
they brought Lauren in,
yeah,
but one player that I think is interesting is Anthony.
yeah,
Obviously, he did do great at Leeds, but we know at his when Parker and Anthony were together at Bournemouth, this was his. I think he have his breakout season that
yeah.
year, and he liked Anthony that year. So I wonder, some players just do really well under a certain manager, and he was straight in the team. So I wonder if he could be an option.
So he was one that was actually quite high on my list when I was looking at potential Dan James replacements this week. Um, I just had a bit of uncertainty about whether he would go straight in and, how Burnley would line up. And I still have a little bit of uncertainty about that just because also bringing in Sarmiento, who primarily wants to play from the left and that sort of thing. But I certainly think that Anthony, like you say, Scott Parker knows him. Scott Parker has gone to bring him in again. Um, so that would sort of give you a positive indication. I think, to be honest, if not Foster, I think probably if I were looking at a Burnley player as good as Kolyosho is, I think if I were looking at a Burnley midfielder right now, it probably would be Jaden Anthony, just for that connection as much as anything else, like you say.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Um, so that's sort of the top six. I guess we'll sort of pick out sort of two or three others. I think that we want to talk about. Obviously, we want to focus on them, but I think there's a few that sort of conveniently sort of slot in after that. I'm going to very briefly mention Middlesbrough. Just because I think they got a good result on the board this weekend, and I think there's a couple of the key sort of talking points. Obviously, in this game, it was Matt Clarke with another goal, and then the Ramsey own goal. But the latte laugh thing obviously happened. He was left out of the squad initially when they travelled, after having his head turned by Ipswich's interest. Um, Borough held firm, which I think is unsurprising. He then travelled to Wales, came off the bench. I think for them, ultimately, keeping hold of him will be significant. Um, and they brought in Ben Doak. Obviously, we're not going to go through every team's transfers, but I think you probably would have looked at Middlesbrough, and I know we like Isaiah Jones, and I have been a fan of Riley McGree and everything, but you would have said, okay, the sort of wide attackers, they're possibly lacking a little bit of something there. They brought in Micah Hamilton from Man City and Ben Doak from Liverpool, and you know all of a sudden you're looking at a team that has started reasonably well, which is something that Borough haven't done the last couple of years. And they've added this quality, and it's like, you know, particularly from relatively soon after the break, I think they're another team that could become, you know, interesting again. I know people have started, with a number of them, and I know they go into a difficult run, which I think probably helps us in some ways in terms of assessing. who's going to play and everything. But there will be people who hold some of these players through, whether you've got like an Ailing or an Azaz or a Latte Lath, and I don't think that's the worst idea. Don't know what your thoughts are on Borough at this point.
Yeah. For me, like I mentioned, because I'm focusing on away day seven, I'll be getting rid of them. Got rid of Latte Laugh. I've got Aileen. He'll probably be going soon. Um, but they've got a lot of options now, and they can play different ways for different teams. Um, Interestingly, though, like Hamilton hasn't gone straight into the
Mm,
side, so I wonder if Ben. I know it's different because they own Hamilton. They don't own Ben though, but might be a watch and wait and see to see how they line up. But yeah, like I'm going to get rid of them in the short term, but long term they could easily come back in. I think.
yeah. Anyone in particular you wanted to talk about?
I'm going to mention QPR. I mean, unfortunately, I have to mention it. I thought I thought Luton. The game changed on two incidents. If Adebayo scores, go
Yeah.
2-0 up, probably win it more comfortably because they have to attack more. I was Dembele. I know he didn't score anything. I've got him. He's going to be a good addition. And Frey
Yeah.
is a handful. We've joked about QPR's forwards for a while, but he's clearly going to be first choice. I think.
Yeah.
Is he 6 million? I think, or maybe a bit more.
Give or take, I think he's around that. Let
Yeah,
me sort of double check.
I definitely think.
6.0, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think at times he might be an okay option if they get a decent run. For Luton, um, Adebayo's missed seven big chances. He's not going to continue missing them, but um, keep an eye on Raoul Walters.
Yeah.
He's going to be playing right wing back, and he's 5 million. If Luton start learning how to defend, he's going to do very well. I think.
Yeah, I think it was the first half of that game because I'd sort of asked you. I think I'd asked you. I'd meant to ask you about Walters, um, and I was watching the first half of that game, and I was like, oh yeah, I think Walters is going to be an option. Obviously, I bought Adebayo vice
Yeah,
captained. I feel like based on the way the game went, I still feel like that was a decent decision. It just didn't work out, particularly with
yeah.
that chance. I think that goes in, and you're having a different conversation. Um, so yeah, I think that there's still sort of some, and I think it was the first blank for Doughty, with obviously the two goals conceded and the booking. Um, but on another day, he could have done more as well. But yeah, Frey was the one who, like, obviously we'd seen sort of Dembele impress in the other games. Frey, I thought, you know,
Yeah,
obviously, was it the first goal that McGuinness defends really poorly and gets caught sort of wrong
yeah. I
side?
don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know why he didn't foul him.
Frey like rolls him and it's over. Uh, and then the really good finish on the second half. That's the second goal.
Yeah,
That's
it was
that's
a good
really
finish.
tough, dropping, and it's almost like the side foot volley, but you get so much power on a side foot volley, and it's just I was sat there like just so impressed. Um, but
I
yeah,
sat there pissed off, but
yeah,
we won't talk. Yeah, I think options for both.
yeah.
I think.
Um, and so the other one that I wanted to mention that I think have had an interesting start. I think we're sort of seeing bits and pieces from them. I have to mention Oxford. Um, I think we've said from the first game they'll probably concede, but they're going to score goals. And I think the only game well, they've scored in every game, which sort of backs that up. They got two against Norwich in the opener, and that's the one clean sheet they had. Uh, two against Coventry, and obviously only lost right at the end. They got a goal against Blackburn away, conceded two. and then they've got three in this game against Preston, and obviously conceded one. Um, but and so I just think, we've talked about them before, but I do think they're a team that, Harris has got another goal in this game. And I think he's sort of one that, particularly, we've talked about some of these strikers, where I do think, particularly if you want sort of a cheaper striker that you can play some weeks, bench the others, I think he is really putting his hand up in that sort of position, or that sort of role in people's squads. I think he's had one price rise, but he's still at 5.6. And I think that's the sort of price where you really are looking at a player and thinking, yeah, that might sort of give me something else, that whether it might solve an issue or it might enable me to do something else. I think that's sort of role that he can really fill for people. And so I think he could be an interesting one.
Yeah, I think they feel a lot like Plymouth from the start of
Yeah.
last season. Very good at home. Both their wins are at home, so I
And
wonder
and
if
that sort
they're
of and that sort of attacking, but you can get at the defense sort of thing as well.
yeah, yeah. So the next two home games, Stoke at home, Burnley at home. Um, yeah, like you mentioned, if you bring him in, you're going to be able to bench him maybe in the away games. But yeah, like I said, I really like what for their budget, what they've done for their centre mids is very good. Got options out wide as well. Yeah, yeah, I don't mind Oxford. I can't believe Harris has 4 goals, but sometimes these things happen in the championship.
Yeah. Anyone else in particular you want to mention?
I don't think so, Angus. I always want to talk about every team.
Yeah, no, I think it was just a few to sort of pick out,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
addition to the top six. Just because I think, like I say, particularly with someone like Oxford, with that specific option of
yeah. They
Harris, I
deserve
think
it. Yeah.
it is quite interesting. So we'll get into the few questions that people have asked, just as a way to sort of round it off. Um, we've been going just over an hour, so it feels about right just to round it off with some questions. John Jaco said, "Give us one big differential and one must own from each of you if you were to overhaul now. Um, which what price will Doughty be in the EFL game next year as a starting left wing back in League One?"
Isn't he a midfielder in that game?
I think so.
To start,
I'm not talking about that game. As much as I want to make the jokes about Luton getting relegated, I'm not talking. Uh,
that's not going to happen, is it?
no.
Um,
But yeah, one big differential and one must own if you were to overhaul now.
I'm going to go Mundell. I think he's going to be. I'm not saying he's going to be differential for long, but I think he will be.
Mm.
Must own. Must own. That's really hard because there's no. Trying to think. Do you have a differential, Angus? While I think of a Mustang.
So he's come up in a question, um, and I've been really impressed with him. I was actually impressed with sort of what I saw briefly. I'm going to go with Manhoof at Stoke. They have a decent run coming up. It's not great, but they have a
Yeah,
decent run. It, I know Jamie is a massive fan of him, um, and I do think in the bits and pieces I've seen, I'm like, no, that's a real player there. And so I do think he's an interesting one as a differential. Stoke have had a reasonable start to the season, and I do think he's an interesting one. For my must own, I'm going to go really boring, and I know he's just blanked. Doughty. If you look at his points before this weekend, I think, you know, yes, he's expensive, but I think aside from sort of this game, he showed, I think it was like 25 points in 3 games. Um,
he only got 1 assist in that as well.
yeah, exactly. Like he's not even padding that, and you haven't been keeping like clean sheets regularly either.
Yeah,
So it's like that's where for me it's like he's shown his value in that respect. So yeah, he would definitely be in for me.
I don't have him, and I went O'Hare because I thought he was going to leave. I would go Hamer. I think long term, Hamer's probably one of the best play. Well, he's probably the best centre mid in the league, quite comfortably, I think.
And you look at some of those targets he's got to hit on corners as well. You see some of the chances there. They're sort of either creating or nearly creating. You know, the likes of Harry Suter in the box. It's the fact that you've got someone on set pieces delivering to that sort of you know target can be a big sort of bonus as well. Um, so Troiler has asked about um, ownership for players when sorting through the transfer section. So no, I think the ownership. I don't like. I'm not. It's not the technical phrase, but I don't think it's been like turned on. Um, so no, I don't think anyone is seeing ownership. If people really want to see ownership, we can sort of pass it on. That it's not showing up. He also thoughts on the best Sheffield United attacking option for the next 4 game weeks, including away days in game week 7 and Overhaul in game week 9. He says Raksaki is on his radar. Um, I was actually I did think Raksaki did well in that game. That being said, I do agree with Dan that for me I'd be looking at Hamer. But
Yeah,
if
I'm
you have a
intrigued to
feeling
see
about
what
Raksaki, I wouldn't put you off that.
I'm intrigued to see what they do with Brooks because I think Wilder does like Brooks, and he's obviously been playing on the right side. Um, Maybe hold off one more week just to see if Raksaki does stay in that position.
Mm. Uh, Niall Fairbrother has asked, would you go Moore or Madger for the next 3 game weeks?
Oh, I've got more. I don't love having more. I must admit it.
I'm just looking at the fixtures. Sheffield United, Hull away, Derby home, Portsmouth away. Madger has Portsmouth away, Plymouth home, Sheffield Wednesday away.
It's pretty, isn't it?
I think I just feel like even sort of in the bits and pieces I've seen, I haven't seen a full West Brom game. I've seen a couple of Sheffield United games now. Um, I think it's 2, might even be more. I'm now having to look at their games just to see how many of them I've watched. I watched them play Watford, and I watched them
Preston?
play QPR. I think I watched them play Preston, so I've watched them play 3 times actually. And at the moment, I would probably lean towards Madger.
Yeah, I get that. Features are pretty similar as well, I
Yeah,
think. Yeah, I think Madger probably. Also, if I think if Sheffield United click, they could hammer its sides, but that doesn't mean Moore is going to score the goals. Whereas if Sheffield West Brom win, they could win 1-0. If Madger scores, he's going to get top bonus probably, or very very close to it.
yeah, and I think there's a couple of these guys like Fellows or defensive cover that you might want from West Brom, but Madger doesn't feel like he's blocking you off in the same way. Whereas with Sheffield United, I mean, you've got the defensive ones, someone like a Burrows, who I think is coming on more and more as well. You've got O'Hare, you've got Hamer, you've got Raksaki, you know, the goalkeeper as well. It feels like more potentially is blocking you off something a little bit more, which might sort of play into that decision as well. Gaffer Hoops has asked, what are your thoughts on best game weeks for away days boost, given that what we've seen so far? And cheeky second question on what to do with Latte Lath, seemingly a minute's risk with Conway arrival, saying this will probably be covered already on the pods. Cheers, gents. So we didn't cover we've sort of talked since Conway came in about the sort of minutes risk. I think this week it was purely about the transfer sort of movement or lack thereof, but just sort of that whole the transfer situation. that sort of I still think Latilat will be first choice, and I think we've seen a couple of times Conway has come on instead of someone else rather than instead of Latilat. So I still think he's the main man. But um, away days, you've talked about playing it in game week 7. I've sort of mentioned the idea of playing it in game week 7.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, for a while now, I've been planning for 7. Um, Burnley away at Oxford, um, Luton away at Plymouth. You got Norwich away at Derby. You got QPR at Blackburn, Sheffield United against Portsmouth, and Sunderland away at Watford, and West Brom away at Wednesday. I know you don't get Leeds, which could be a key, but there's a lot of sides there with really good options, and I just think sevens. Well, I'm pretty set on 7. I won't be changing it. I don't think.
yeah, I mean the other one which I've seen mentioned in the thread underneath that with non-stop FPL about game week 14, which is another one that I have sort of looked at. Um, that week you get uh, Burnley, Leeds, Middlesbrough, Sheffield United, and Sunderland away. The trade-off there is they don't necessarily have the best games.
Yeah,
Burnley
Burnley
are
away at
away at West
mm,
Brom, Leeds are away at Millwall, Middlesbrough away at QPR, Sheffield United are away at Bristol City, and Sunderland are away at Preston. So you've got a mixed bag there, but it's more just I think the main thing with that one is you get those 5 teams all away,
yeah,
um, and so I think that's where sort of that almost comes into play. It's just from having those teams playing away. You could maybe make an argument for game week 10 as well, just because you've got Burnley away, Coventry away. Um, I mean, Sheffield United have a horrible away game at Leeds, but the fact that you could potentially take that game on um, with your away days, but you have Sunderland away and West Brom away. That actually that's just something there where it's like particularly there you've got Burnley away at Sheffield Wednesday, sort of not the easiest, not the most difficult. Coventry away at Preston, um, Sunderland away at Hull, and West Brom away at Oxford. That's forming the majority of your team that week potentially. Just shows that I think it's one of those things where obviously we've highlighted a couple of weeks, but I think actually if you can find a week where you like it just shows there, even picking out that, if you can find a week where you like, say, 4 teams that are playing away, that's all you really need.
yeah. Also, I'm doing 7. I'm having to take probably a few hits to get there, and I've already done a couple. But if you haven't started planning, you might have like 4 or 5 players. So maybe you do wait until like a 10 or a 14. So yeah, like everything, it's never one way to play Gaffr, especially in the first set when there's no doubles.
Yeah,
It's that's one of the best things is because you can basically do whatever. Some people have already played in game week 1 and done
yeah,
okay. So
yeah. And like you say, with 7, I think that it's the trade-off in terms of what I'm saying with some of those other weeks as well, is you've got some of these teams that have, at least on paper, good fixtures. Which I think is the real trade-off there. But it also depends how set up you are. Part of the reason, because I wasn't initially planning for it, although I've made a couple of moves which could have an eye on it. I'm also sort of looking at it and the number of hits I would have to take to get there. Am I really happy with it? Who knows? But It's the whole sort of thing there, like you say, in terms of all these things that play into it at this point. And finally, Petriananen has two questions for us. Uh, Players who should be template after the international break. That's number one. Number two, thoughts on Million Manhoof. And as I've said, I think I do like Manhoof. I think he's started well. Um, he looks a player, and I think he's a real option. Um, Players who should be template after the international break, Dan.
Well, we mentioned two, I think, Hamer and Doughty. Um, it's, Sunderland are going to end up template,
Mm.
aren't they? They're so cheap to get in. Yeah, I don't know. Striker's an interesting one because, like Joseph has done quite well. He could be template, but the way you're playing your boost, he might not be as template as you think to start with. And there's no real expensive ones really stepping up. So um, it's good. Maybe you can take a few more punts because I don't think you're going to get punished this year as much. I don't think.
No, I mean I would say again, it's not necessarily a player because I think it's part of the thing, and we've talked at length about the options from this team. But particularly, either if you're willing to ride out the Leeds game, first game back, or following that, Burnley then have a very nice run. And I think it will be difficult for people. I mean, we said right at the start, before the season started, about game week 6. We were talking
Yeah,
about game week 6 with Burnley. Um, and I do think that it will reach one of those points where it will get to game week 6, and it will be really difficult for people to go without Burnley players.
yeah, I
Um,
agree.
so that's probably the other one. We talked a lot about the various options, but I just think in general, it will probably be template to have at least one Burnley player in your team from probably game week 6, if not sort of people who have them already for game week 5. Um, so that's all the sort of questions. Um, as I say, we'll have a bit of a workout about whether we're going to do something extra in the break. There's not necessarily a huge amount. We've talked about some of the transfers, but um, we'll work out if there's anything else we're going to do content wise. Otherwise, if not, we'll be back after the game week 5 action. It's game week 5 next, isn't it?
Yeah, it's it.
Yeah. Um, there will be something in the break. Details to be confirmed, but there will be something in the break for Super League because we've obviously slacked off on that. There's been a lot going on, but and particularly with things like European qualifiers and midweek games as well, it's been quite uh, tough to fit in. But there'll definitely be something over the break to get back into the Super League content as well. But details to be confirmed on that. Um, Otherwise, I think all that's left for me to say is thank you for listening and goodbye.
Bye.